friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my 5 best books of 2020. So these are the 5 books that were new to me in 2020, so not necessarily published in 2020. In fact, I think none of these were published in 2020. They were books that were new to me in 2020 that I either gave a 5-star, I gave a glowing review for it at the time when I talked about it on my channel, and or it's a book that still haunts me. Like, if it wasn't a 5-star review at the time, it's a book that I'm still thinking about now and should maybe be reevaluated because it has me still thinking. And these 5 are in no particular order. I didn't want to rank them because they're so different from each other. Like, I have horror, literary fiction, science fiction, and young adult dystopian all on this list, all in this top 5. So there's no really way to rank them because you're comparing apples to oranges. So the first book that I want to talk about is White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi. This was such a weird read and I loved it, and I still think about it now. So a black family has this old house, I believe in the English countryside. They are trying to turn it into a B&B, and the house is deeply racist. Much in the same way that, like, the house comes alive in The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, this house is alive as well, and it doesn't really like the Silver family living in it. And the house has claimed various women, and it is currently trying to claim the daughter Miranda Silver. Miranda Silver is a very interesting figure in that she has pica and has this compulsion to eat chalk. I didn't like Mark Z. Danielewski's House of Leaves, but I also got House of Leaves vibes from it. And I feel like I'm doing a kind of bad job of just giving you these surface details because I don't want to spoil it, but this book, this family, this house still haunts me months later, because I read this back in March, I believe, when I was reading women's horror literature. I would love to reread this and just get lost in that house again. So I think, as I mentioned, if you liked The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, if you liked House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, I think you should give White is for Witching a try. I see very similar vibes there. This, I can imagine, will be one that I'm thinking about for quite a while. The next book I have here is Midnight Robber by Nalo Hopkinson. So this is science fiction. It's on a Caribbean colonized planet called Toussaint. We follow this young girl, at the beginning of the novel, a young girl named Tan, who is sort of obsessed with this Midnight Robber mythology. There are festivals around the Midnight Robber on Toussaint. And when her father is accused of a crime, he is ejected basically from Toussaint into New Halfway Tree, which is a, like, brutal, early colonizers sort of settlement without any of the luxuries of Toussaint itself. The sort of harshness and ugliness of humanity is super real. It was so weird. Wholly not what I was expecting. The world building was fantastic. I thought the exploration of, like, the ugliness of humanity, both in like a quite settled and civilized, heavy scare quotes around that place, compared to a much more developing place, like just in terms of like how humans behave when resources are like scarce and you are living for basic resources versus like luxury, and how that ugliness of humanity appears in both places. I thought that the alien races that Tan encounters in New Halfway Tree and the sort of shifted perspective that we see once she starts engaging with them more was super fascinating. And like, it was just so magical. It is exactly the type of sci-fi that I enjoy, and I cannot recommend this enough. If you have had sort of poor experiences with sci-fi, like the hard sci-fi that's all like math and science, and this is how my fantasy science works, I think this might be more up your alley if you're into soft sci-fi like Octavia Butler, Parable of the Sower kind of stuff. Becky Chambers kind of stuff. And again, it's a book that I keep thinking about months after I've read it. I believe I read this in June. The next book that I read is magical contemporary fiction, and that is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. So this is set in BC. Ruth Ozeki lives on the coastline, and she picks up a lunchbox off the beach following the tsunami. She figures it's been washed over post-tsunami in the currents, and she opens it up, and inside it is the diary of a young girl called Nao. Nao is a 16-year-old Japanese girl, and what becomes clear as Ruth starts to translate the journals within the lunchbox is that Nao is maybe going to kill herself, or perhaps is already dead, depending on how long it took the lunchbox to travel through the currents. And it starts this sort of magical, compulsive journey to find out if Nao survived the tsunami, if she was long dead by the time the lunchbox was washed out, and if it is possible to save Nao, if it is possible to still get Nao the help that she needs. It had been sitting on my TBR for such a long time, and it's a chunky book, but I flew through it. I listened to the audiobook for a little bit and then switched to the physical book partway through, and there are pros and cons to both. Pro to the audiobook is that Ozeki reads it herself, and so she sings some of the chants and the songs exactly the way she envisions them, which is just delightful. Pros to reading the physical book is that there are footnotes that Ozeki does not touch in the audiobook reading. There are merits to each format, and again, this is a book that I am thinking about quite often. My thoughts go back to like that mystery of the lunchbox on the beach and diaries and the sort of magical qualities of this text. And I do want to reread it in physical so that I can get those footnotes that I missed while I was listening to the audiobook. I would definitely recommend checking this out. I think I'm gonna bury this one slightly in the middle. I don't want to leave off on this because it is a little oddball of a book, but I think it's a favorite of the year. It's one of the last things I read in 2020, but it is something that I still think about all the time. Almost every day I am thinking about The White Bone by Barbara Gowdy, which is absolute batshit. I think the best way to pitch this is like epic fantasy with elephant protagonists. Like, I think that's the only way that we can frame this that makes any sense. So this is about a young elephant named Mud. She is a visionary elephant. She has visions of the future. After the slaughter of the she-Ds and the she-S's, two different matriarch-led elephant herds are slaughtered by poachers. She begins a journey across the desert to find the white bone, this legendary object that when thrown will point in the direction of the safe place, an elephant utopia with food and water and safety from poachers. I've said it before when I've talked about this book, I feel like Tolkien would be proud of the world building that went into this elephant story. Just the mythology of the different creatures, the naming, the hymns. It's wholly bizarre and wholly entrancing, and this is definitely not a book for everyone. Like, I feel like you have to be into a little bit like weird, absurd, surreal fiction, or you have to be open to like a truly bizarre fantasy read. Like, I think that's the only way it makes sense to think about this, is that this is high fantasy in which the protagonists are elephants and have magical powers. And I cannot stop thinking about it. And if that sounds at all appealing to you, you should 100% check this out, because it is definitely a read that has haunted me. The final book I have here, which is significantly less weird, is The Marrow Thieves by Cherie Dimaline. So this is a piece of Indigenous literature. It is set in Canada, so this is young adult literature. This is set in a world in which white people have forgotten how to dream, and this dreaming leads to like a sickness of the soul, and Indigenous people can still dream, and they are being hunted to harvest the marrow of their bones where dreams live. And it's a found family novel. It is a journey to the north novel in which this sort of band of misfit Indigenous folks, a lot of them children who don't have any knowledge of the land, don't know how to survive off the land because they are city folks, have been adopted by some elders and are being taught the stories and the lessons required to survive off the land, to live in harmony with the land, as they journey to this rumored community of Indigenous folks for safety in numbers. It was such a quick read, and I've heard it described as the dystopian now. So much of dystopian literature is dystopia for white folks. Like, it's a disruption of life for white folks. A lot of marginalized groups, especially Indigenous groups, are already living in the dystopia. They have lived through that catastrophic moment of colonization, residential schools, genocide, cultural genocide, and they are living in the dystopian now. And this book definitely, I think, fits within that category, and reframing it in that way, it has me thinking a lot about how I approach Indigenous texts and also how I approach dystopian literature. I just think shifting our perspective a little bit is important. On top of that, it is, I don't want to say fun. It is a fast-paced, compelling read as you make this journey. I feel like that tension, that constant threat, is what makes it a very quick read. I cannot stop thinking about this, and I would highly recommend that you read this as well if you are all interested in sort of the dystopian pandemic literature that has really had an upspike this year and last year. I think it fits in with that quite nicely, and also offers a different perspective on what is sort of dystopian. Those are my 5 best books of 2020, my top 5 books of 2020, and the 5 books that still haunt me many months later in the case of some of these books. Let me know what your best book of 2020 was in the comments down below, and let me know if you've read any of these, or if you're interested in picking up any of these now that I have talked about them here. Thank you, patrons, for making videos like this possible. I really appreciate the work that you enable me to do. Perks right now for patrons are book clubs. So this year I am starting a sort of smaller drop-in book club where we will read a book that's 200 pages or less at this point. It looks like the vote currently is tied between The Grown Up by Gillian Flynn and Alana, The First Adventure. So if you're interested at all in a book club, the book club involves a live discussion at the end of the month that is patron exclusive, available to patrons at all tiers. So if that interests you at all, link to the Patreon page is in the description box down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye!